UFC Atlantic City betting and DraftKings show. We have 14 fights this weekend. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. And we're going to kick things off in the bantamweight division as Calvin Loughran is a minus 360 favorite. The comeback on Angel Pacheco is plus 285. And there's been some significant movement on the Loughran side. And I get it, right? Because this guy had a tough debut against Taylor Lapilus. He gave a pretty solid account of himself there. He pushed a pretty high pace, a lot of cage wrestling. Lapilus just has really good takedown defense, and Loughran just struggled to get him to the ground at times. I don't think that's necessarily going to be an issue here against Pacheco, who previously fought on Contender Series. He had that back and forth war against Danny Silva where he got dropped early on in that fight and worked his way back into the fight. Both guys landed a ton of shots there, but Pacheco's very hittable on the feet. He's also, despite being a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you can take him down, you can control him, and that's how I expect Loughran to come into this fight, because Loughran has great cardio, and I mentioned he likes to push that wrestling pace. That's where I see the biggest advantage in this fight, and that's why I'm siding with the favorite in Loughran here. I think he gets it done here. Last thing to note, Pacheco is moving down to 135 as well. I'm not so sure I think that's a good move for him here. I think Loughran's able to wrestle him and get his hand raised. We're going Loughran by decision. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have Jacob Malkoun, a minus 238 favorite. Now, the comeback on Andre Petroski is plus 198. And similar to that first fight, there's been some significant movement in favor of Jacob Malkoun in this one, because now he's swelling up to a sizable favorite now. And I get it, because Malkoun pushes that sticky wrestling pace. He averages over 7 takedowns per 15 minutes, and he's going to stick to you like glue and just control you on the mat. He's not going to sell out for a finish. He just wants to control you and really bank these rounds. Now, where I worry about him in this matchup is Andre Petroski comes from a college wrestling background as well. It doesn't mean that Malkoun's not going to be able to get him down. I'd expect Malkoun to be able to get him down, but Petroski's not necessarily just going to accept position. He's very good at reversing. He did that against multiple fighters at the UFC level. He's submitted Nick Maximov, who also has that sticky grappling style similar to a Malkoun. And on the feet, Petroski's way more powerful. We know Malkoun has questions in terms of his stand-up. He doesn't have much to offer there, and the durability is a concern. So I just think Petroski actually has more ways to win this fight. I get why you would favor Malkoun, probably because of the cardio dynamic. Petroski's cardio at times has not looked good, and if this fight does make it 15 minutes, I think you have to favor Malkoun to be winning down the stretch. But because Petroski's more powerful on the feet, he's got more knockout potential, and I don't think he's a complete fish in the grappling exchanges either. I think he's certainly live in the plus 200 range here, and I like this fight on DraftKings because either way, regardless of who wins, I think you can project them to score pretty well. So I'm going to side with the dog here in Petroski. We're going to say Petroski by TKO. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the women's flyweight division, we have Melissa Gatto, a minus 155 favorite. The comeback on Victoria Dudakova is plus 130. Now, Dudakova is moving up a weight class here to face Melissa Gatto. I think that's important because she wasn't exactly a stud at 115. I'm not sure that she's going to translate that well to 125. Now, fortunately for her, Melissa Gatto is very willing to accept takedowns, to accept bottom position, just to play jiu-jitsu off her back. So in that regard, it's definitely favoring Dudakova, who wants to land takedowns, who wants to spend time in top position. But on the flip side, Gatto's very capable of landing takedowns herself, and we've seen Dudakova controlled on her back at times as well, and I think Gatto's clearly more dangerous on the mat in terms of submission equity, and on the feet, I think Gatto's clearly the better striker as well. So it's really just the concern with Gatto is she just going to accept those takedowns and give up minutes off of her back, because that's why you wouldn't want to be laying the juice here. But I'm still going to side with her just because I think she can win this fight on the feet, and I think she can win it on the mat as well. We're going Gatto by submission. That's the official pick. Which brings us to the people's main event in the light heavyweight division, as Ibo Aslan comes in as a minus 130 favorite. The comeback on Anton Turkalj is plus 110. And this is one where I think you can make a legitimate case for both sides. We'll start on the Aslan side. This guy previously fought on Dana White's Contender Series last season, won with a first-round knockout against Paul Hanacho Jr., and it's very clear that he's got big power. He's got devastating leg kicks and big power, but what he doesn't have is cardio. because anytime this dude has got extended whatsoever, his cardio does not look good. Now, he hasn't got extended very often at all. In fact, the only time he got extended into the second round was the last time that he fought Anton Turkalj on the regional scene back in 2020. These guys faced off. Aslan had a ton of success in that first round and really was kind of boxing up Turkalj, even maybe stunned him a couple times. But then at the end of round one, Turkalj kind of seemed to turn the tides a little bit. And then as soon as round two started, Aslan was done. Like that cardio really cliff dived after a heavy pace in that first round. And that's the concern here, because even though I think you can favor Aslan to be winning the striking, to be winning that first round, and have a good potential to actually hurt Turkalj. We know Turkalj doesn't play much defense. He's very hittable on the feet. He's coming off a first round knockout loss against Tyson Pedro as well. But I just always tend to favor the grapplers who have legitimate cardio, because if that early knockout doesn't materialize, then they have major upside the longer the fight goes on. So I'm going to side with Turkalj here. It's not super confident because I'm acknowledging he could get knocked out pretty quickly here. So in terms of DraftKings, I think you want to hedge this one. I think you want the winner. So I'm going to be very heavy on both sides of this on DraftKings, but the official pick is going to be Turkalj by submission, and I'm hoping it plays out similar to the first time when these guys fought. Which brings us to our next matchup in the featherweight division, as Denis Bazoukian is a -125 small favorite. The comeback on Connor Matthews is +105, and both of these guys previously fought on Dana White's Contender Series. They've actually both fought twice on Contender Series. Now, we'll start on the Bazoukian side. He trains out of Longo and Weidman's MMA, so he's got Chris Weidman on this card. So he's got a good camp. He's training with solid dudes, but he just doesn't really have that it factor. Like, there's not one thing about him that's going to blow you off the page, but he's very solid wherever the fight goes. Like, his striking's okay. He'll mix in the wrestling if he can. And he's got a ton of heart. His cardio is pretty solid as well. And I just think he had a tough go of it in his 2 UFC matchups. He got matched up against Sean Woodson, where he actually got out-wrestled in that spot, which wasn't the greatest look, even though he was on short notice there. Sean Woodson, primarily a boxer, even though we have seen him start to mix in the wrestling a little bit more. And then his last time out against Jamal Emmers back in November, UFC 295, he gets knocked out in the first round. And this is a guy who previously had very good durability. So it's not a great look here. I think we're getting a buy low spot, because you go from those two fighters who are like legitimate UFC level fighters, and both of them are pretty good as well. And now you're going to Connor Matthews, who is a Contender Series fighter. Yes, he came through as a big underdog. I bet him in that spot against Farias on Contender Series, and he came through as a big underdog. But I don't really think this is a great matchup for him. Not that it's a bad one, but I think Bazoukian's going to have some advantages here. You know, Connor Matthews has only fought to a decision once in his career, and that was his last fight on Contender Series. Historically, he's more of a first round or bust type of fighter. He trains with the New England Cartel guys like Rob Font, Calvin Kattar, and he fights out of the southpaw stance. He'll mix in the body kicks quite a bit. He's got a little bit of power in his hands as well, but he's extremely hittable. And he'll look to mix in the grappling. His grappling's okay, but he regularly will get reversed and can be out-grappled by better grapplers as well. And Bazoukian, I actually think, might be the one more likely to land takedowns. I favor him as the fight goes on. I think he has the cardio edge. And I just think the UFC experience is going to pay off a little bit here for Bazoukian. So we're going Bazoukian by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Julio Arce, who's the biggest betting favorite on the card. He's a -395 favorite. The comeback on Herbert Burns is +310. And this one's interesting because on both sides, you have guys that we really haven't seen in a while. You know, Arce we last saw back in the end of 2022 when he lost the decision against Montel Jackson. And Herbert Burns we last saw in 2022 when he fought Bill Algeo and basically blew out his knee after the first round. And that was the second time he had to have ACL surgery. So now, you know, multiple knee surgeries, 36 years old, certainly tough to trust, but his submission grappling is very high level. And to a degree, that's going to make him a live underdog in just about any matchup. The reason why I worry about him here here is because he's facing somebody that has good takedown defense in Julio Arce, a guy that's a way better striker than him. I expect Arce to light him up like a Christmas tree while the fight plays out at space. And Arce's historically very difficult to submit as well. He's only been submitted once in his career. That came against Brian Kelleher back on the regional scene. So it's just a matchup that I don't think Burns is going to have many opportunities to hit his win condition. And if that's the case, then I think Arce is really going to box him up, potentially even get the finish. I kind of lean over the over 1.5. I think that's an interesting look. It's priced around a pick 'em. I could see both of these guys, both of them probably having a little bit of ring rust, starting off slow, especially the Burns side coming off, back-to-back knee surgeries. I think this one could kind of cruise over. Arce's not like a super aggressive finisher in the beginning. So if the finish does materialize, I think it probably comes after that 1.5. Just something to note there. I'm going to side with Arce. I think it gets it done by TKO. And next fight up, we have Lupe Godinez, a -205 favorite with Virna Jandiroba on the comeback at +170. And this is one I'm not going to spend a ton of time on because I actually don't really like it for the slate on DraftKings. We have 14 fights this week, so we have the luxury to get a little picky, and I just don't think that either fighter really projects well. Obviously, if Jandiroba hits her win condition, she might be able to score well relative to her price, but I think she's going to struggle to land takedowns here. 13 of her 19 wins have come by submission. She averages around 2.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, so we know what she's going to try to do. The difference is her last couple fights where she's been able to have success, fighters like Marina Rodriguez and others that just can't really defend those takedowns and don't really know what to do once they're taken down. That's not Lupe Godinez. I think she's going to be much more difficult to take down. I think Godinez is going to try to keep space here as the better boxer. Now, we have seen Godinez have fight IQ concerns in the past that's kind of cost her in some of these fights, but I think if she comes in with the right game plan here, she should really be able to win the striking, keep the fight on the feet, and not even really look to engage in the grappling. Now, the issue with DraftKings is that's not going to project well, because if we get a striking-based decision with no takedowns, no finishes, she's probably scoring like 75, maybe 80 points, and at her price, it's just not going to do it on a full slate. So we're going Godinez by decision, but in terms of DraftKings, I'm probably going to look to be underweight to both sides. Next fight up in the featherweight division, we have Jamal Emmers, a -218 favorite with Nate Landwehr on the comeback at +180. And we'll start on the Emmers side. He's coming off that fight that I mentioned against Dennis Bazoukian where he looked very sharp. He knocked him out in the first round. And Emmers is kind of the tale of two stories because at points, he looks like he's an absolute stud. His striking's very sharp. He can mix in the leg kicks. He's very fast with his combinations. And he can lean on that collegiate wrestling background as well. Now, the downside with Emmers is at other times, he's just hasn't looked right. Like he's making mental lapse errors in there. He's getting himself finished a bunch of times. He's been finished like 4 times in his career. And he's also not used his wrestling advantage like that fight against Giga Chikadze. He could have went to the wrestling a lot more, in my opinion. There's just been multiple instances with Emmers where it seems like sometimes his biggest problem is in between the ears. But when he's at his best, he's a very competent striker, a very well-rounded fighter that's good wherever the fight goes. And then on the flip side, Nate Landwehr is just a madman. We know what Landwehr is going to bring to the table. Nate the Train is going to bring that hellish pace. He wants to move forward. He wants to trade in the pocket and land strikes in combination. And he's got some power. He can mix in the wrestling as well, although I doubt he will here because he'll probably be at a disadvantage on the mat. But this is one where it's like, I get the case for Nate anytime he's a big enough underdog where he's going to go out there and fight for your money. And we've seen the downside of Emmers where if he just looks off, Landwehr could look really good here, obviously. So for that reason, I'm definitely going to look to have a decent amount of exposure to the Landwehr side, but I think the most likely outcome, assuming that Emmers is the better version of himself, it's going to be Emmers by decision. I favor this one to go 15 minutes. Despite the high pace, I do expect it to hit the judges' scorecards. We're going Emmers by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our featured bout on the prelims as Chitty Chitty Bang Bang Chitty Njokuani is -140 148 favorite. Currently, the comeback on Reese McKee is plus 124. And we'll start on the Njokuani side. This is a guy who previously fought on Contender Series a couple seasons ago. He made his UFC debut, rattled off back-to-back victories. Since then, he's lost 3 of his last 4 fights, and he's been finished in 2 of those fights as well. So he's on a 2-fight losing streak at 185. So what does he do? He decides to drop to 170, a weight class that he hasn't made in years, and previously said way back when that he would never try to make 170 again because of the permanent damage that it did to his body. So it's certainly going to be one that I think you need to keep an eye on weigh-ins and first even see if he's gonna make the weight, but also just see how he makes the weight, whether it's been a good cut, if you can kind of, get any sort of info off the weigh-ins or in interviews, whatever. It's definitely gonna be key this week, because if he's fine and the weight cut is fine, I do think he's the better striker in this matchup. Clearly more power, clearly more finishing upside on the feet while he's fresh. But we know that gas tank has been an issue for him in the past as well. So if the fight were to get extended, I think he could potentially be in some trouble, especially if he had one of those really tough weight cuts. And then on the flip side, McKee is making his second stint in the UFC. His first stint didn't go so well, dropped 2 fights, tough matchups, rattled off a couple wins on the regional scene, and then he came back against Angel Lusa and ended up dropping a decision there. But he did have some moments. And what McKee is going to bring to the table is heart and cardio. And that might be enough against Njokuani if he's able to survive in that first round, because McKee's very hittable on the feet. He's very slow on the feet as well, very gangly. If he doesn't get knocked out, though, I think he can potentially come on strong late and be a live underdog here. So I get the line movement. He started off as a big underdog. Now he's a small underdog. So for that reason, you're getting some odds value on DraftKings. He's probably going to be a pretty popular underdog. But I still favor the Njokuani side, and I'm projecting Njokuani to knock him out. I just worry about the weight cut. So keep an eye on Friday on the weigh-ins. I'm actually going to be at the event at UFC Atlantic City. So if you're going to be there at all, definitely come say hi. The official pick is going to be Njokuani, chitty bang bang by knockout. And next fight up, we have Bill Algeo, a minus 230 favorite. Kyle Nelson on the comeback at plus 190. And this one, I think it's Bill Algeo's fight to lose. This is a guy who's a very good round winner because of the pace that he brings, the pressure, the volume as well. And it's not just the striking. He's got a very legitimate submission grappling game as well. He can mix in the takedowns. Yes, he can be taken down, but then he's very live to throw up submissions, potentially reverse his opponents as well. The one concern with Algeo is that he's always fighting with his hands down. And for that reason, he is probably going to eat some shots. And that is a slight concern against a power puncher like Kyle Nelson, who I think that's probably his only path to victory here. I know he's got a couple decision victories recently, but he's generally not a great round winner because he's not a high volume striker. He likes to fight off the back foot, give up the center of the octagon, just things that aren't good in terms of optics. But unless he's able to hurt Algeo here, I just think he's dropping rounds due to the pace, the pressure, and the volume. And I think Algeo's the better submission grappler if the fight were to hit the mat as well. I think nobody's really disputing that. So I think Algeo's fine here. I think the price isn't even that bad, honestly. And I think he should be able to get his hand raised this weekend. We're going Algeo by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the middleweight division, we have Nursultan Razaboev, a minus 258 favorite. The comeback on Cedriques Dumas is plus 210. And this is one that I think it's hard to have a confident read on because we just have so many questions sort of about both fighters, but especially about Nursultan Razaboev, the favorite here, because he had a very checkered past on the regional scene, I guess you could say. Basically, all of his wins have come by first round finishes. Most of them came against very low level competition on the regional scene. And then he makes his UFC debut against Bruno Ferreira, and he just knocks him out instantly. Like, the dude KOs him within a minute and 15 seconds. So we just don't really have much data to go off of from Razaboev while he's facing legitimate UFC caliber competition. So I think the way that I'm treating Razaboev is that, yes, he's got that early finishing upside, but outside of that, I really don't know what to expect. I think he could still be pretty pretty solid. I think he could be a fraud, and the Aslan type of fighter where that cardio falls off a cliff, we just don't really know because we haven't seen it yet from him. Now, on the flip side, Dumas has generally been a fade for me. I faded him big in his UFC debut against Josh Fremd, and then since then, he's got a lot more favorable matchups where I wasn't able to fade him, but it's not like he really blew you away in either of those wins. And I think Dumas is a guy who does have some tools on the feet. Obviously, he's known for that head kick. He's finished multiple opponents with a big, powerful head kick, and he's got power on the feet as well, but I don't trust his cardio, even though he's been 15 minutes at the UFC level, and we've seen him win a decision and win a round 3 in his last fight. Those are all great things, but I don't really trust his cardio, to be honest with you. Like, it hasn't looked good to me. A lot of those fights, he's being gifted top position. He's not a great wrestler, but he's just being gifted top position. So if you're just laying on somebody in top, you're not really expending all that energy. So I don't really trust this guy. The thing is the price is good on him. It's good enough where I think if you're betting a money line, I'm okay with like maybe taking the stab there. I'm personally not going to do it, but I get why people would just because of the question marks on the Rizboa side. Maybe you don't think he warrants being that big of a favorite, but this is one where I think in terms of DraftKings, because we're not confident, because we have questions on both sides, it's just going to be one that I think you want exposure to both sides. If you're playing into Rizboev, he's going to be popular, but you want that early first round finish. If you're playing into Dumas, you're just basically banking on the fact that Rizboev is a fraud and maybe Dumas is able to take over late. I think both instances are live in this fight. I'm going to side with Rizboev as the official pick, but it's not a confident one. We're going Rizboev by submission. That's the official pick. And next up, we have another middleweight matchup as Bruno Silva comes in as a minus 285 favorite with Chris Weidman on the comeback at plus 230. I mentioned Weidman earlier because he obviously trains with Dennis Bazoukian and he's gonna have that home crowd pop, but I just don't think it's gonna be enough, dude. Like, Chris Weidman's just a shell of the fighter that he used to be. The durability, the cardio, it's just not what it used to be. He's lost 4 of his last 5 fights. The only win in that span came against a gassed out Amari Akhmedov, where I didn't even think he looked good in that fight. The multiple knee injuries as well. Like, I just think there's many red flags here. He turns 40 years old later this year. Like, I get why people don't want to trust Silva as a big favorite here, but he really should win this fight, and he really should hurt Chris Weidman on the feet, because what Silva does have is big power. Most of his wins have come by knockout. If he can keep the fight upright, then I think it's pretty clear he's going to hurt and probably knock out Chris Weidman here. 11 of his last 13 fights have ended inside the distance, so I am expecting the winner to score well regardless, but I'm going to side with the favorite here. We're going Silva by TKO. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our co-main event. This one's in the welterweight division as Vicente Luque takes on Joaquin Buckley. This one's currently a pick'em. We'll start on the Luque side. He's coming off that main event victory against Rafael Dos Anjos, but I don't know, man. Like, I know I picked against him there, which looks bad in hindsight, but I don't just want to hop on him now, especially in what could end up being a tougher matchup, because the concern with Luque is that he's very hittable on the feet, and he had that brain injury from the damage that he's taken in the past. He's been in a ton of wars. He's never really been able to defend takedowns either, despite being a good submission grappler. And then on the flip side, Buckley is very powerful. This dude's built like a brick house. Most of his wins have come by knockout. We've seen at times he's able to clinch his opponents up against the fence at well. Looks good in the clinch. He can mix in a takedown here or two. The one concern with Buckley is his durability, because he's been knocked out 4 times in his career. So it's one where I think it's going to be a brawl. Both guys have power. Both guys have defensive concerns as well. But I'm going to side with Buckley because I just trust him a little bit more at this stage in his career, and I think he could get it done. We're going Buckley by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our main event as we have Aaron Blanchfield, a minus 185 favorite. The comeback on Mano Ferro is plus 154. And this is a great matchup of 2 very skilled fighters in this division. Blanchfield getting her second main event. This one's coming in front of her home crowd in New Jersey, and I expect her to perform up to expectation here because her ground game is absolutely elite in terms of this division, and I think that's going to be the difference here. The thing is, she's not going to be lost on the feet either. We've seen her striking come a long way. We know she's going to mix in the takedowns. She wrestles at a high rate, holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and she's very dangerous once she gets her opponents there, whether she's controlling them or hunting for submissions as well. And we know that type of style of fighter is going to correlate good for DraftKings points. So we love Blanchfield in terms of DraftKings. On the flip side, for Rowe, very powerful striker, very smart, high IQ striker. She's very active with the leg kicks, likes to maintain distance and maintain space, use her range, and she makes it very difficult for her opponents to get volume off on her. Her striking defense is very high, and she's tough to take down as well. But the thing is, she hasn't really faced anyone with the ground game of Blanchfield, not just the wrestling, but the submission grappling as well. Like, really the best wrestler that she's fought was Tabitha Ricci, who was up a weight class on short notice, who's not even a great wrestler to begin with. So it's one where I know Rose Namajunas, she was able to stuff all of her takedowns, but I think Blanchfield just brings another level, and the fact that she's going to be able to compete on the feet and then mix in the ground game, I think that's what's going to end up being the difference here. We're going Blanchfield by submission. The last thing I'll say is I think the cardio dynamic is going to favor the Blanchfield side. She's got excellent cardio, and not that Farrow has bad cardio, but I think I'm a little more suspect of it, especially in a 5-rounder. I think Blanchfield could take over later and get a sub in the later rounds. So we're going Blanchfield by submission. That's the official pick. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings. It'll have my ownership projections as well. A bunch of other content up each and every week. We have our betting package, which went live last week. Started off with a bang there. We have picks from Pepe, Ozzy, Evan. So if you're interested, definitely check it out. I'll link it in the description as always. Appreciate you guys watching. Best of luck, and we'll see you next time.